Oh man, they all say my name.
Megalomaniac.
Okay. All right. So, I'm actually talking about reading, which I do way too much of these days. Being in grad school, I really have to read books, maybe an hour and a half a day, maybe more. And not only that, but lately I've started thinking about reading a lot. So, yeah, this whole concern comes from someone who's probably reading an unhealthy amount. But my question is, how can reading give us to ourselves? And so we often say that we can get lost in a book, right? And so in this sense, like, books can show us an entire world that's not our own, you know? They can open up worlds that are, and they can transport us to places that are completely enticing and interesting and estranging and wonderful and terrible and amazing and beautiful. But this really poses an existential threat if you think about it. Because if we get lost in books, then don't books prevent us from finding ourselves? I mean, where exactly does our self go when we're reading? Or is it possible for us to actually find ourselves in a book? Is it possible, I mean, this raises another question, which is it possible to find oneself within another? The other being, you know, the author or the world that's opened up by this book. Can we find ourselves while reading, or do we have to wait until after we read to later reflect on what we've read and then bring ourselves to the table? And furthermore, to the best books, the most enticing, do they always put us into a passive relationship with them, or is it different? So in a sense, reading raises a fundamental existential question, I think, which is how can one lose oneself? And which raises another question, which is a self something that can exist without being in the presence of another? You know, is there such a thing as, like, a lot of existentialists talk about, like, the innermost self, you know, like, does that even exist? Or, you know, how do we exist differently in reading than we would in, like, walking in a park or sitting alone in a room or having a conversation? Another way of thinking about reading, though, is that it might be a truly moral activity. Because if morality is really recognizing the other, or treating another person truly as a person rather than just as a means, then true acts of reading that estrange us from ourselves may hold this potential of really recognizing and sort of being with someone else. Reading, which may negate our sort of like inner core, perhaps might offer us the ability to connect to a world, to realize another and truly be moral. Another interesting sort of parting note before we break up into groups is there's different kinds of books that make for different kinds of reading. There are self-help guides, novels, travel guides, philosophy texts, poems, etc. How do these differences inform the sort of above questions about, you know, reading? Do poetic line breaks and sentence fragments build gaps in the texts which give us room to breathe? Are self-help guides perhaps more empowering than a good novel? We're going to break up into groups to discuss. I have some quotes. And I guess we'll do different groups, I think, different times. But for now, I guess we can just do, like, the people, I guess, that you're sort of next to. So we can do, like, 3 here, and, like, did you want to participate, or?
If you want me to get an intro.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, so you can be with these 3 here, and then you 3, and you 3, and you 3. So I'm going to pass out these